The abandoned opera house stood like a forgotten monument in the industrial district of Chicago, its cracked marble columns holding secrets that daylight would never touch. Inside, the grand hall had been stripped of its former glory, but tonight it served a darker purpose. Crystal chandeliers, hastily installed, cast golden light across faces that preferred to remain in shadow. Julian. Steele adjusted his cufflinks as he descended the stone staircase into the main auction hall. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly, though he wore it like armor rather than fashion. At 35, he had built a technology empire that spanned 3 continents. But tonight he was here for something that no amount of money should ever buy. His private investigator had whispered about this gathering for months. A place where human lives were traded like commodities. The air smelled of expensive cologne mixed with something metallic and cold. 40 men filled the velvet seats arranged in a semicircle. Yes. Their faces illuminated by the soft glow of tablets displaying transaction details. Julian took a seat near the back, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning every corner of the room. He was searching for any sign, any clue that might lead him to his sister, Natalie, who had vanished without a trace 3 years ago. A man in an impeccable gray suit stepped onto the raised platform at the center of the room. His voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone who had done this many times before. He welcomed the gathered crowd with words that made Julian's stomach turn. Tonight's offerings included items that had been acquired from various sources, each one verified and guaranteed. The first few auctions passed in a blur. Julian barely registered the numbers being called, the hands being raised, the lives being sold. He was waiting for something specific, though he did not know what. His investigator had only told him that tonight would be different.
Oh.
That something significant would happen. Then she appeared. The lights dimmed except for a single spotlight that illuminated the platform. A woman stepped forward, her movements hesitant yet graceful. She wore a flowing midnight blue gown that seemed to absorb the light around her. But it was her face that captured every eye in the room. An ornate golden mask covered her features from forehead to chin, decorated with intricate patterns that resembled wings. Only her eyes were visible, dark and filled with something that looked like both defiance and desperation. Her hands trembled at her sides. Julian noticed how her fingers kept curling into fists, then releasing, as if she was fighting an internal battle with herself. Long auburn hair fell past her shoulders in waves that caught the light. She stood barefoot on the cold platform. Her chin lifted in a way that suggested she had not yet surrendered everything. The auctioneer's voice cut through the silence. "This is our premium offering for the evening. She comes from an educated background, trained in classical arts, no family looking for her. The mask is her choice, gentlemen, a symbol of her mystique. She will reveal herself only to her new patron." Julian felt his pulse quicken. There was something about the way she held herself, something that reminded him of Natalie. Not in appearance, but in spirit. His sister had that same stubborn tilt to her chin, that same refusal to break even when the world demanded it. The bidding started at 50,000. Hands shot up immediately. Julian watched the numbers climb, watched how the woman flinched with each new bid, each new voice claiming ownership of her future. 75,000. 100,000. The amounts kept rising, each one stripping away another layer of her composure. A man in the front row, thick-necked and red-faced, called out 250,000. He smiled as he said it, a cruel curve of lips that made Julian's hands tighten into fists. The woman on the platform took a step back, her breathing visible in the rapid rise and fall of her shoulders. Julian stood. His voice, when it came, was clear and final. $1 million. The room fell into stunned silence. Even the auctioneer paused, his practiced composure faltering for just a moment. Every head turned to look at Julian, trying to place him, trying to understand why someone would pay such an amount. The woman's eyes found his across the distance. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. Julian saw something shift in her gaze, a flicker of hope mixed with fear, as if she was not sure whether she had been saved or claimed by something worse. The auctioneer recovered quickly, $1 million going once, going twice. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the opera house. "Sold to the gentleman in the back." Julian walked forward, his steps measured and calm. Security personnel appeared at his sides, men he had hired specifically for this moment. When he reached the platform, he did not grab her or claim her. Instead, he removed his suit jacket and held it out to her. The gesture was simple but clear. She stared at the jacket for a long moment before taking it with shaking hands. Julian spoke softly, his words meant only for her. "My name is Julian. I am not like these men. When you are ready to tell me your name, I will listen. Until then, you are under my protection." The woman wrapped the jacket around her shoulders. As Julian led her toward the exit, past the staring faces of men who had been outbid, he felt her stay close to his side. She did not speak, but her silence said everything about the years she had survived and the walls she had built to keep herself whole. Outside, the Chicago night air hit them like cold water. Julian's car waited at the curb, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. As they drove away from that place of shadows and transactions, Julian glanced at the woman beside him. She still wore the golden mask, but her eyes were closed. And for the first time, perhaps in years, she looked like she might let herself breathe. He had paid $1 million tonight, but Julian knew the real price would be measured in trust, in time, and in the courage it would take for both of them to face whatever truth waited beneath that golden mask. Julian's estate sat on the shores of Lake Michigan, 40 minutes north of the city. The 3-story mansion was built with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the water. Dawn was breaking as they arrived, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The woman beside him had not spoken a single word during the entire drive. She kept the golden mask on, her fingers clutching his jacket around, her shoulders like a shield. The car pulled through iron gates that closed automatically behind them. Julian's head of security, a former military officer named Thomas, was waiting at the entrance. Julian had called ahead with specific instructions. No male staff were to approach the woman. No one was to ask her questions. She was to be given complete privacy and respect. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes stepped forward. Her name was Margaret, and she had worked for Julian for 8 years. She smiled gently at the masked woman. "Hello, dear. I've prepared a suite for you on the 2nd floor. It has its own bathroom and a view of the lake. Everything you need is there. Please let me know if you require anything else." The woman nodded once, a small movement that barely disturbed the mask. Margaret led her inside while Julian remained in the entrance hall, watching her disappear up the curved staircase. He felt the weight of what he had done settle on his shoulders. He had rescued her from one cage, but he understood that freedom was not something he could simply hand to her. She would have to claim it herself. Julian did not sleep that morning. Instead, he sat in his study with a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands. The room was lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk where 3 computer monitors displayed information he had been gathering for years. On the center screen was a photograph of his sister, Natalie. She had been 24 when she disappeared, bright-eyed and laughing in the image. She had gone to a charity fundraiser in downtown Chicago one October evening and never came home. The police had found nothing. Private investigators had found nothing. It was as if she had simply vanished into air. But Julian knew better. He had spent every resource at his disposal tracking rumors, following threads, piecing together the existence of an underground network that traded in human lives. The auction last night had been his first real breakthrough in 3 years. He stared at the photograph until the morning light filled the room completely. Then he heard footsteps in the hallway. Margaret appeared in the doorway. "She is awake." She asked for tea, but nothing else. "I left clothing options in her room." "She has not removed the mask." Julian nodded. "Thank you, Margaret. Please make sure she knows that she can go anywhere in the house. She is not a prisoner here." The day passed slowly. Julian worked from his study, making calls and reviewing contracts, but his mind kept drifting to the woman upstairs. Around noon, Margaret informed him that she had eaten a small breakfast. By late afternoon, Julian decided to check on her himself. He found her standing in the library on the 2nd floor. The room was his favorite in the house. a circular space with windows overlooking the lake and shelves that spiraled up to a domed ceiling. She stood before one of the windows, still wearing the golden mask, now dressed in simple gray clothes that Margaret had provided. Her hands were pressed against the glass as she stared at the water. Julian cleared his throat softly so he would not startle her. "The view is better from the terrace. Would you like to go outside?" She turned to face him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke her first words to him. "Why did you do it? Why did you pay so much for someone you do not even know?" Julian walked slowly into the room, keeping a respectful distance. He gestured to two leather chairs near a fireplace. "May I tell you a story?" She hesitated, then moved to one of the chairs and sat down carefully, as if the furniture might disappear if she trusted it too much. Julian took the other chair. He looked at his hands before he spoke. 3 years ago, my younger sister went to a charity event in the city. She was passionate about helping others, always volunteering, always believing the world was fundamentally good. That night, she never came home. Julian's voice remained steady, though the pain in his words was clear. The police searched. I hired everyone I could. But it was like she had been erased from existence. Then, about 6 months ago, I learned about places where people are taken. It's places where they are sold. The woman's posture changed. She leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Your sister. You think she was taken to a place like that auction?" Julian met her eyes through the mask. "I do not know, but I have to keep looking. Last night, when I saw you on that platform, I saw the same strength my sister had. That refusal to be broken, even when everything demands it. I could not leave you there. I could not let another person disappear into that darkness." The woman was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger. "My name is Victoria. Most people call me Tori. I was taken 8 months ago from a gallery opening in New York. I was an art curator. I had a life, friends, a small apartment in Brooklyn." She paused, her fingers moving to touch the edge of her mask. "They put this on me the first night. They said it made me more valuable, more mysterious. Eventually, I stopped trying to take it off. It became easier to hide behind it than to face what they had turned me into." Julian felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "You are not what they tried to make you. You are still Victoria Hayes, art curator from Brooklyn. Everything they did to you was a lie. This is the truth." Tori looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly, her hands moved to the back of her head. She found the clasp that held the golden mask in place. Her fingers trembled as she worked it loose. Julian waited, not moving, barely breathing. The mask came away. Tori's face was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features. It had everything to do with the courage it took to reveal herself. She had high cheekbones and a straight nose. Her dark eyes were redrimmed from months of tears, but they held a fierce intelligence. A small scar marked her left temple, a reminder of some violence Julian did not ask about. She set the mask on the table between them. "This is me. This is who I am without it." Julian smiled, a genuine expression of respect. "Thank you for trusting me with this." Tori wiped at her eyes, surprised to find tears there. "I do not know why I trust you. I should not trust anyone. But when you spoke to me last night, when you gave me your jacket instead of grabbing me like I was property, something inside me remembered what it felt like to be human." They sat together as the afternoon light moved across the library floor. Julian told her about Natalie, about the sister who had taught him to be kind in a world that often rewarded cruelty. Tori told him about her work, about the paintings she loved, about the life that had been stolen from her on a night that should have been filled with art and wine and conversation. As evening approached, Margaret brought them dinner on a tray. They ate together in the library, talking about small things now, letting the weight of their shared trauma settle into something more manageable. When Tori laughed at something Julian said about his first disastrous attempt at cooking, the sound filled the room like light breaking through clouds. Later, as Tori prepared to return to her suite, she paused at the library door. "Julian," she said, testing his name on her tongue, "thank you for giving me a choice. For the first time in 8 months, I feel like I might remember how to be myself again. Julian stood. You never stopped being yourself, Tori. They tried to take that from you, but they failed. You survived. That takes more strength than most people will ever understand. Tori smiled, a fragile but real expression. Tomorrow, she said softly, I would like to help you find your sister. If there is anything I remember, any detail that might help, I want to tell you Julian felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he had not felt in years. We will find her together. As Tori left the library, the golden mask remained on the table, abandoned and powerless. Outside the windows, the lake reflected the last light of day, for the first time since that terrible night 3 years ago. Julian Steele allowed himself to hope that darkness did not always win. The next 3 weeks transformed both of their lives in ways neither could have predicted. Each morning, Julian and Tori met in his study after breakfast. She would sit across from him at the large desk, a cup of tea warming her hands, and share everything she could remember about the people who had taken her, the locations, the faces, the conversations she had overheard while pretending to be broken and silent. Julian recorded every detail. He cross-referenced her information with data his investigators had gathered over the years. Patterns began to emerge like stars appearing in a dark sky. Names connected to businesses, businesses connected to properties, properties connected to more disappearances. The network was larger than either of them had imagined. But now they had a map. Tori proved to have an extraordinary memory for details. She recalled the texture of wallpaper in a holding room, the accent of a guard who had been careless with his words, the sound of a train passing by a warehouse where she had been kept for 2 months. Each piece of information became another thread Julian could pull. During those weeks, something else happened. The professional partnership between them deepened into something neither had been looking for. Julian found himself watching for Tori's smile, listening for her footsteps in the hallway. She had started painting again, using supplies Margaret had purchased at her request. The library became her studio, and Julian would sometimes find her there in the afternoon, lost in color and form, reclaiming the passion that had been taken from her one evening. As they walked along the lake shore, Tori stopped and turned to face him. The sunset painted her face in warm light. Julian, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. When I was in that place, I promised myself that if I ever got out, I would never let anyone close to me again. I thought trust was what had gotten me hurt. But you have shown me that trust is actually what saves us. Julian reached out and gently took her hand. Tori, I started this search to find my sister. But somewhere along the way, you became just as important to me. I do not want to pressure you or make you feel like you owe me anything. You owe me nothing. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary. Someone who survived hell and came out still believing in beauty. Tori stepped closer to him. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. I think I am falling in love with you. I did not think I could feel this way again. I thought they had taken that from me too. But here you are, and here I am. And it feels like maybe we were supposed to find each other exactly the way we did. Julian pulled her into his arms, and they stood there on the shore as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The kiss they shared was gentle and filled with promise. It tasted like healing, like two broken people discovering that their pieces fit together in a way that made them both whole. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after the auction. Julian's investigator team traced a series of property transfers to a shipping company operating out of Detroit. The evidence was strong enough to involve federal authorities. The FBI had been investigating similar cases for years. But Julian's information gave them what they needed to act. Tori made the decision herself. She would testify. She would stand in front of lawyers and judges and tell them everything. Julian held her hand the day she walked into the federal building, and he was there when she walked out hours later, exhausted but resolute. The raids happened on a cold morning in February. 15 locations across 4 states were hit simultaneously. Julian watched the news coverage with Tori curled against his side on the library sofa. They arrested 47 people involved in the trafficking network. They rescued 23 victims, including a 19-year-old girl who had been missing for 4 years. But Natalie was not among them. Julian felt the grief hit him fresh, as if his sister had disappeared all over again. Tori held him while he cried for the first time since she had met him. She whispered words of comfort and hope. "We will keep looking. We will never stop looking." "But Julian, you saved 23 people. Your sister would be so proud of you in the months that followed." Julian and Tori threw themselves into creating something meaningful from their pain. They established the Natalie Steele Foundation, dedicated to fighting human trafficking and supporting survivors. Tori became the face of the organization, speaking at events and sharing her story with a courage that inspired thousands. Julian worked behind the scenes, using his wealth and connections to fund rescue operations and safe houses. Their love grew stronger with each passing day. They learned each other's rhythms, the way the musicians learn to play in harmony. Julian discovered that Tori sang while she painted. Tori learned that Julian made terrible jokes when he was nervous. They built a life together that honored both their scars and their healing. 6 months after that night at the auction, Julian took Tori back to the lake shore at sunset. He got down on one knee and held out a ring, a simple band with a single diamond that caught the dying light. "Victoria Hayes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the strongest, most beautiful person I have ever known. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tori pulled him to his feet and kissed him before answering. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding took place on a spring morning when the world seemed newly green and alive. It was a small ceremony on the grounds of the estate, attended by close friends and the staff who had become family. Margaret cried happy tears. Thomas stood as Julian's best man. Survivors from the foundation came to celebrate. Women and men who understood what it meant to reclaim your life from darkness. Tori walked down the aisle wearing a simple white dress and no mask. Her face was radiant with joy. When she reached Julian, he took both her hands in his and looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. The officiant spoke about love that rises from ashes, about two souls who found each other in the darkest of places and chose light. When Julian and Tori exchanged their vows, they promised not just to love each other but to continue fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. As they kissed to seal their marriage, the gathered witnesses applauded. But Julian and Tori were lost in their own world. A world they had built together from courage and trust and a love that refused to be destroyed by anything that came before. Later, as they danced under strings of lights hung between trees, Tori whispered in Julian's ear, "Do you remember what you told me that first night? You said I was under your protection." Julian smiled and held her closer. "And you are. Always." Tori shook her head gently. "No, Julian. We protect each other now. That is what love means." The music played on. The lake reflected stars in celebration. And two people who had been broken by the cruelty of the world discovered that healing was possible, that love could bloom even in the aftermath of trauma, and that sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. Their story was not about the $1 million or the auction or even the rescue. It was about two human beings who refused to let darkness have the final word. It was about choosing hope when despair seemed easier. It was about love that transforms, not because it erases the past, but because it builds a future worth believing in. And as Julian spun Tori across the dance floor, both of them laughing like the weight of the world had finally lifted. They knew that their real journey was just beginning. Together, they would continue fighting. Together, they would keep searching for Natalie. Together, they would help others find their way out of darkness, because that is what love does. It takes broken pieces and makes them into something beautiful. It takes two people who should have been destroyed and gives them the strength to not just survive, but to thrive. Julian Steele had paid $1 million for a masked stranger at an underground auction, but what he received in return was priceless. He found courage he did not know he needed. He found purpose that went beyond profit. He found Victoria, and in finding her, he found the best version of himself. As the night deepened and guests departed, Julian and Tori stood alone by the lake, hand in hand, watching the moon rise over the water. No masks, no shadows, Just two people who had fought their way to freedom and found love waiting on the other side.